George Savile, 1st Marquess of Halifax PCDLFRS, was an English statesman, writer, and politician who sat in the House of Commons in 1660, and in the House of Lords after he was raised to the peerage in 1668. Background and early life: 1633 to 1667. Savile was born in Thornhill, West Yorkshire, the eldest son of Sir William Savile, 3rd Baronet, and his wife, Anne Coventry, eldest daughter of Lord Keeper Thomas Coventry, 1st Baron Coventry. His father distinguished himself in the Civil War in the Royalist cause and died in 1644. Savile was also the nephew of Sir William Coventry, who is said to have influenced his political opinions, and of Lord Shaftesbury, afterwards his most bitter opponent, and great-nephew of the Earl of Strafford. He was the great-grandson of Sir George Savile of Lupset and Thornhill. He was educated at Shrewsbury School in 1643 while his mother was staying with a sister in Shropshire. He later travelled in France, where he attended a Huguenot academy in Paris, stayed in Angers and Orleans, in Italy and in the Netherlands, and was also believed to have been educated in Geneva. He returned to England by 1652. In 1660, Savile was elected Member of Parliament for Pontefract in the Convention Parliament, and this was his only appearance in the Lower House. In the same year he was made Deputy Lieutenant for the County of Yorkshire and Colonel of a foot regiment in the Yorkshire Militia. The Duke of York sought a peerage for him in 1665, but was successfully opposed by Clarendon, on the ground of his ill reputation amongst men of piety and religion. The Chancellor's real motives may have been Savile's connection with Buckingham and Coventry. The honours were, however, only deferred for a short time and were obtained after the fall of Clarendon on the 31st of December 1667, when Savile was created Baron Savile of Eland and Viscount Halifax. In 1667 he was commissioned captain to raise a troop in Yorkshire for Prince Rupert's regiment of horse. Political career: 1668 to 1680. Halifax supported zealously the anti-French policy formulated in the Triple Alliance of January 1668. He was created a Privy Councillor in 1672, and, while it is believed that he was ignorant of the secret clauses in the Treaty of Dover, was chosen envoy to negotiate terms of peace with Louis XIV and the Dutch at Utrecht. His mission was still further deprived of importance by Arlington and Buckingham, who anticipated his arrival and took the negotiations out of his hands. Though he signed the compact, Halifax claimed no share in the harsh terms imposed upon the Dutch, and henceforth became a bitter opponent of the policy of subservience to French interests and of the Roman Catholic claims. Halifax took an active part in Parliament's passage of the Test Act of 1673, and thereby forfeited his friendship with James. In 1674 he brought forward a motion for disarming Popish recusants, and supported one by Lord Carlisle for restricting the marriages in the royal family to Protestants, but he opposed the bill introduced by Lord Danby in 1675, that imposed a test oath on officials and members of Parliament, speaking with the quickness, learning and elegance that are inseparable from all his discourses, and ridiculing the multiplication of oaths, since no man would ever sleep with open doors, should all the town be sworn not to rob. He was now on bad terms with Danby, and a witty sally at that minister's expense caused his dismissal from the council in January 1676. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in November 1675. In 1678 he took an active part in the investigation of the Popish plot, to which he appears to have given excessive credence, but opposed the bill that was passed on the 30th of October 1678 to exclude Roman Catholics from the House of Lords. In 1679, after Danby's fall from grace, Halifax became a member of the newly constituted Privy Council. With Charles, who had at first kicked at his appointment, he quickly became a favourite, his lively and libertine conversation being named by Bishop Gilbert Burnet as his chief attraction for the king. His dislike of the Duke of York and of the crypto-Catholic tendencies of the court did not induce him to support the rash attempt of Lord Shaftesbury to substitute the illegitimate Duke of Monmouth for James in the succession. He feared Shaftesbury's ascendancy in the national councils and foresaw nothing but civil war and confusion as a result of his scheme. He declared against the exclusion of James, was made an earl in 1679, and was one of the triumvirate which now directed public affairs. He assisted in passing into law the Habeas Corpus Act. According to Sir William Temple, he showed great severity in putting the laws against the Roman Catholics into force, although in 1680 he voted against the execution of Lord Stafford the Trimmer, 1680 to 1682. Halifax's whole policy had been successfully directed towards uniting all parties with the object of frustrating Shaftesbury's plans. He opened communications with the Prince of Orange, and the King's illness called for summoning James from Brussels. Monmouth was compelled to retire to Holland, and Shaftesbury was dismissed. On the other hand, while Halifax was so far successful, James was given an opportunity of establishing a new influence at the court. It was with great difficulty that his retirement to Scotland was at last effected. The ministers lost the confidence and support of the country party, and Halifax, fatigued and ill, at the close of this year, retired to his family home at Rufford Abbey. He returned in September 1680 on the occasion of the introduction of the Exclusion Bill in the Lords. The debate that followed, one of the most famous in the annals of Parliament, became a duel of oratory between Halifax and his uncle Shaftesbury, the finest two speakers of the day, watched by the Lords, the Commons at the bar, and the King, who was present. It lasted 7 hours. Halifax spoke 16 times, and at last, regardless of the menaces of the more violent supporters of the bill, who closed round him, vanquished his opponent. The rejection of the bill by a majority of 33 was attributed by all parties entirely to the eloquence of Halifax. His conduct transformed the allegiance to him of the Whigs into bitter hostility, the Commons immediately petitioning the King to remove him from his councils forever, while any favour which he might have regained with James was forfeited by his subsequent approval of the Regency scheme. Halifax retired to Rufford again in January 1681, but was present at the Oxford Parliament, and in May returned suddenly to public life and held for a year the chief control of affairs. Shaftesbury's arrest on the 2nd of July was attributed to his influence, but in general, during the period of Tory reaction, he seems to have urged a policy of conciliation and moderation to the King. He opposed James's return from Scotland and, about this time, made a characteristic but futile attempt to persuade the Duke to attend the services of the Church of England and thus to end all difficulties. He renewed relations with the Prince of Orange, who in July paid a visit to England to seek support against the French designs upon Luxembourg. The influence of Halifax procured for the Dutch a formal assurance from Charles of his support, but the King informed the French ambassador that he had no intention of fulfilling his engagements, and made another secret treaty with Louis. In 1682, Halifax opposed James's prosecution of the Earl of Argyll, arousing further hostility in the Duke, while the same year he was challenged to a duel by Monmouth, who attributed to him his disgrace. Withdrawal from politics, 1682 to 1689. Halifax's short tenure of power ended with the return of James in May. Outwardly he still retained the king's favour and was advanced to a marquessate in August and to the office of Lord Privy Seal in October. Being still a member of the administration, he must share responsibility for the attack now made upon the municipal franchises, especially as the new charters passed his office. In January 1684 he was one of the commissioners who supervise all things concerning the city and have turned out those persons who are Whiggishly inclined. He made honourable but vain endeavours to save Algernon Sidney and Lord Russell. My Lord Halifax, declared Tillotson in his evidence before the later inquiry, showed a very compassionate concern for my Lord Russell and all the readiness to serve them that could be wished. The Rye House plot, in which it was sought to implicate them, was a disastrous blow to his policy, and in order to counteract its consequences he entered into somewhat perilous negotiations with Monmouth, and endeavoured to effect his reconciliation with the king. On the 12th of February 1684 he procured the release of his old antagonist, Lord Danby. Shortly afterwards his influence at the court revived. Charles was no longer in receipt of his French pension and was beginning to tire of James and Rochester. The latter, instead of becoming Lord Treasurer, was, according to the epigram of Halifax which has become proverbial, kicked upstairs to the office of Lord President of the Council. Halifax now worked to establish better relations between Charles and the Prince of Orange and opposed the abrogation of the recusancy laws. In a debate in the Cabinet of November 1684 on the question of the grant of a fresh constitution to the New England colonies, he urged with great warmth that there could be no doubt whatever but that the same laws which are in force in England should also be established in a country inhabited by Englishmen, and that an absolute government is neither so happy nor so safe as that which is tempered by laws and which sets bounds to the authority of the prince, and declared that he could not live under a king who should have it in his power to take, whenever he thought proper, the money he has in his pocket. The opinions thus expressed were opposed by all the other ministers and highly censured by Louis XIV, James and Judge George Jeffreys. Opposition to James II, 1685 to 1688. At James's accession, Halifax was deprived of much of his power and relegated to the presidency of the council. He showed no compliance with James's preferences. He was opposed to the parliamentary grant to the king of a revenue for life. He promoted the Treaty of Alliance with the Dutch in August 1685, and he expostulated with the king on the subject of the illegal commissions in the army given to Roman Catholics. Finally, on his firm refusal to support the repeal of the Test and Habeas Corpus Acts, he was dismissed, and his name was struck out of the list of the Privy Council. He corresponded with the Prince of Orange, conferred with Dykvelt, the latter's envoy, but held aloof from plans which aimed at the prince's personal interference in English affairs. In 1687 he published the famous Letter to a Dissenter, in which he warns the nonconformists against being beguiled by the indulgence into joining the court party, sets in a clear light the fatal results of such a step, and reminds them that under the next sovereign their grievances would in all probability be satisfied by the law. The tract was influential and widely read. 20,000 copies were circulated through the kingdom, and a great party was convinced of the wisdom of remaining faithful to the national traditions and liberties. He took the popular side on the occasion of the trial of the 7 bishops in June June 1688, visited them in the Tower, and led the cheers with which the verdict of not guilty was received in court, but the same month he refrained from signing the invitation to William, and publicly repudiated any share in the prince's plans. On the contrary, he attended the court and refused any credence to the report that the king's newborn son, James, Prince of Wales, was supposititious. After William's landing in southwest England, Halifax was present at the council called by James on the 27th of November. He urged the king to grant large concessions. He accepted the mission with Nottingham and Godolphin to treat with William at Hungerford, and succeeded in obtaining moderate terms from the prince. The negotiations, however, were abortive, for James had resolved on flight. In the crisis that ensued, when the country was left without a government, Halifax took the lead. He presided over the Council of Lords, which assembled and took immediate measures to maintain public order. On the return of James to London on the 16th of December, after his capture at Faversham, Halifax repaired to William's camp and henceforth attached himself unremittingly to his cause. On the 17th he carried with Lords Delamere and Shrewsbury a message from William to the king advising his departure from London, and, after the king's second flight, directed the proceedings of the executive. On the meeting of the convention on the 22nd of January 1689, he was formally elected Speaker of the House of Lords. He voted against the motion for a regency, which was only defeated by 2 votes. The moderate and comprehensive character of the settlement at the Revolution plainly shows his guiding hand, and it was finally through his persuasion that the Lords yielded to the Commons and agreed to the compromise whereby William and Mary were declared joint sovereigns. On the 13th of February, in the banqueting house at Whitehall, he tendered the crown to them in the name of the nation, and conducted the proclamation of their accession in the city. Return to power, 1689 to 1695. At the opening of the new reign, Halifax had considerable influence, was made Lord Privy Seal, while Danby, his rival, was obliged to content himself with the presidency of the council, and controlled the appointments to the new cabinet, which were made on a trimming or comprehensive basis. His views on religious toleration were as wide as those of the new king. He championed the claims of the nonconformists as against the High Church party, and he was bitterly disappointed at the miscarriage of the Comprehension Bill. He thoroughly approved also at first of William's foreign policy, but, having excited the hostility of both the Whig and Tory parties, he now became exposed to a series of attacks in Parliament which finally drove him from power. He was severely censured for the disorder in Ireland, and an attempt was made to impeach him for his conduct with regard to the sentences on the Whig leaders. The inquiry resulted in his favour, but notwithstanding, and in spite of the king's continued support, he determined to retire. He had already resigned the speakership of the House of Lords, and he now quit his place in the cabinet. He still nominally retained his seat in the Privy Council, but in Parliament he became a bitter critic of the administration and the rivalry of Halifax with Danby, now Marquess of Carmarthen, threw the former at this time into determined opposition. He disapproved of William's total absorption in European politics, and his open partiality for his countrymen. In January 1691, Halifax had an interview with Henry Bulkeley, the Jacobite agent, and is said to have promised to do everything that lay in his power to serve the king. Quote, "This was probably merely a measure of precaution, for he had no serious Jacobite leanings. He entered bail for Lord Marlborough when he was accused of complicity in a Jacobite plot in May 1692, and in June During the absence of the king from England, his name was struck off the Privy Council. Halifax spoke in favour of the Triennial Bill, which passed the legislature but was vetoed by William, suggested a proviso in a renewed licensing of the Press Act, which restricted its operation to anonymous works, and approved the Place Bill. He opposed, probably on account of the large sums he had engaged in the traffic of annuities, the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694. Early in 1695 he delivered a strong attack on the administration in the House of Lords. After a short illness, arising from a rupture caused by vomiting after eating an undercooked chicken, he died on the 5th of April that year, at the age of 61. He was buried in Henry VII's chapel in Westminster Abbey. Family. Halifax was twice married. He married firstly in 1656 the Lady Dorothy Spencer, daughter of Henry Spencer, 1st Earl of Sunderland, and of Dorothy Sidney, Saccharissa, leaving a family including Lady Anne Savile and William Savile, 2nd Marquess of Halifax. By his marriage with Dorothy Spencer, he was brother-in-law to Lord Sunderland. Despite the family tie, the two men were bitter and lifelong political opponents. Dorothy died in 1670 and he married again in 1672, Gertrude Pierpont, daughter of William Pierpont of Thoresby. They had one daughter, Elizabeth, later Countess of Chesterfield, who seems to have inherited a considerable portion of her father's intellectual abilities. Gertrude survived him, his eldest son Henry Savile, Lord Eland, having predeceased him in 1687. His second son William succeeded to his peerage, on the death of the latter, in August 1700 without male issue. The peerage became extinct, and the baronetcy passed to the Saviles of Lupset, the whole male line of the Savile family ending in the person of Sir George Savile, 8th Baronet, in 1784. Henry Savile, British envoy at Versailles, who died unmarried in 1687, was a younger brother of the first Marquess. Halifax has been generally supposed to have been the father of the illegitimate Henry Carey, the poet. Styles of address: 1633 to 1644, Mr. George Savile. 1644 to 1660, Sir George Savile BT. 1660, Sir George Savile BT MP. 1660 to 1667, Sir George Savile BT MP DL. 1667 to 1672, the Right Honourable the Viscount Halifax DL. 1672 to 1675, the Right Honourable the Viscount Halifax PCDL. 1675 to 1679, the Right Honourable the Viscount Halifax PCDL FRS. 1679 to 1682, the Right Honourable the Earl of Halifax PCDL FRS. 1682 to 1695, the Most Honourable the Marquess of Halifax PCDL FRS.